So my research broadly was about emotion regulation flexibility and how we measure that construct. So for a bit of background, we know that emotion regulation flexibility is a really great skill to have. It's linked to really positive mental health outcomes, but we don't know a lot about how to measure it. We don't really know how to assess people's ability to flexibly regulate. And so that was sort of the basis of my study, but specifically we were looking at a recently developed measure of emotion regulation flexibility called the free scale. So this was pretty new. It'd only been around for a few years. And as with any new measure, we just wanted to see if it was valid, so if it was actually capturing the construct that it said it was measuring. And we were interested in looking at this from an ecological validity perspective. So what that basically means is, does somebody's score on this free scale that they sit and they do it once, does that actually reflect their real life experiences once they go about their lives in the real world? So I was very lucky in that my data was all already collected for me by my supervisor, Kristen Gainey, and her lab back at the University of Buffalo in New York. And this was good because I was doing my honours during COVID. So luckily I had all that data that I didn't have to adjust anything too much. So my role was basically crunching the numbers and doing a lot of data analysis with a big pool of data. But the study that they'd done to collect that data was really cool. They'd used an ecological momentary assessment design, which is, in the most basic way, just getting repeated measures from participants throughout the course of their daily life. And so what they'd done specifically in this study was get people to come into the lab, and they'd completed the free scale sort of at a baseline appointment, and then they'd done a few other tasks. And then researchers sent the participants home with a smartphone, and they kept the smartphone for a week. And during that time, the participants would get surveys throughout the course of their day. They would be asked things like how positive they were feeling, how negative they were feeling, how their well-being, that sort of stuff. So they would be asked these questionnaires multiple times throughout the day, and rather than coming to the lab and sort of just filling out a questionnaire and sort of where a bit of those lab biases come into play, participants were able to just sort of answer them really as they were feeling in that moment. So that was a real strength of the study. And so by having that data, we were able to compare people's scores on the free scale and see if they were associated with their daily experiences of emotions and mental health symptoms. Yeah, it's a big question. It was a stressful question for me when I was in the process of honours, because I actually got null findings. So we found that the free wasn't related to people's emotional experiences or mental health symptoms in ways that we thought they would be. So it was a stressful moment, I think, but it did give me the chance to think a little bit more creatively about what this means and what the bigger picture is. And there's a number of reasons why we could have had insignificant findings. But without going into that too much, I think the bigger picture of this research, it really encourages us to think a little bit differently about how we measure constructs in psychology, particularly ones that have that really dynamic quality to them. I think, if you think about an emotional experience, or, the different emotions you could feel within the course of a day or even within an hour, it's so varied, it fluctuates so quickly. And in psychology, a lot of the time we do use these self-report measures, which are great because they're easy to administer and they are well validated, but they may not always capture that sort of time, the time variable that can come up a lot in other, in real life, I suppose. And so I think from trying to establish whether this scale was ecologically valid and finding that it wasn't, that's not to say it's a bad measure at all, but it just sort of encourages us to think a little bit more creatively about how we go about getting this information, and if there are different ways in which that we can measure constructs in psychology.